Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Aubrey Reeves, CEO of Business and Arts. Before we begin, I'd first like to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm a white settler speaking to you from Toronto. I have the honor to be a guest on the traditional lands and waters of the Petun and Wendat peoples and the Anishinaabeg and Haudenosaunee Confederacies, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River, as well as many other Indigenous nations, some of whose names are no longer remembered. By saying the names of its original keepers, we remember that this territory continues to be subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Three Fires Confederacy of the Anishinaabeg to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We acknowledge all who came before us and have traveled the lands and waters of this territory. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work, to live, and to meet on these lands. Today's session is the 11th installment of the Arts Response Tracking Survey, a partnership between Business and Arts, the National Arts Centre, and Nanos Research that we have been running since the start of the pandemic to provide the arts sector with a deeper understanding of Canadians' attitudes on returning to indoor and outdoor arts and culture events across Canada. This survey was in the field in late September. In addition to regular tracking questions, it also looks at donation intentions and ticket purchasing trends. The full report is now available in both English and French on our website. At the end of today's webinar, I kindly ask everyone here today to please share your feedback in a short exit survey about the Arts Initiative and how you've used it to inform your pandemic response and recovery efforts. I'd also like to thank Nanos for their hard work on the Arts project and founding partner NAC for their continued support and commitment. I'd also like to thank supporters David Bennett and the NAC Foundation donors Irfan Raji and Christine Armstrong. As the National Arts Centre is a key partner on this project, today we've enlisted NAC's Executive Director of Audience Engagement to host and moderate today's discussion. Kondwani Mwase is an accomplished marketing professional with over a decade of experience in the field of engagement, loyalty, and communications. He has used his skills to cultivate long-standing relationships with communities and strategic partners alike. In 2019, he launched the podcast 54 Light. The program is a showcase for African accomplishments, reflecting Kondwani's genuine connection to the continent and its diverse people. A symbol of both passion and purpose, it stands as proof that he's committed to elevating cultures and spreading understanding. Just a couple of small housekeeping items for today's session. We're happy to have ASL interpreters Christopher and Emma from Toronto Sign Language Interpreter Service with us here today. Auto-generated English captions can also be turned on. Only the presenters and moderators will have our microphones on today, so please submit your questions in the Q&A box and vote for the ones you think are most relevant. The session is scheduled for 1 hour and 15 minutes to give us ample time for questions. So with that, I will pass the mic to Kondwani for the rest of the session and welcome him to guide us through.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Aubrey. I appreciate it. As Aubrey mentioned, we are starting today's session with a presentation of the research findings by Nick Nanos. And now Nick is Chief Data Scientist and founder of Nanos Research, which is one of Canada's most distinguished research companies. Nick is the official pollster for CTV News. I got to catch my breath here. CTV News, the Globe and Mail, and Bloomberg News in Canada. Nick is also a global fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and a research professor at the State University of New York, and is the past chair of Carleton University's Board of Governors. Nick, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Kondwani, and great to see everyone again. I'm going to share my screen, so I believe that the screen is being shared. I'm going to do a walkthrough the latest tracking that we've done on behalf of Business and the Arts and the National Arts Centre. I'd also like to say, and for those of you who have been on all of the previous webinars, after I make my presentation, I will be hanging out in the chat room answering questions related to the data. So please, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So as Aubrey mentioned, we're going to cover off what the trend line is related to returning to the arts. We're also going to look at motivators, donation trends, and ticket purchasing preferences. So, you can see here when we look at the trend line related to returning to different activities, when we look at the wave that was just completed in the first part of October and the end of September, that the trend is positive basically on all types of art and culture activities. Indoor art up 9 points in terms of those that say that they've already returned. Significantly, not a big surprise since we're coming off of the summer. Outdoor art and culture performances are also significantly up, as are museum and galleries. So, on the positive side of the trend line, you can see that basically 2 and 3 or thereabouts culture goers are returning, are coming back, especially on the outdoor front. The other thing, and we have to point out the good and the bad. About 1 out of every 20 still say that they're never going to come back, but the good news is that those numbers have been fairly stable. The other thing that's quite significant is that 1 out of every 4 are still not sure. So positive movement on that front, but still some individuals who are, why don't we just say, in a little bit of a holding pattern or a parking spot, so to speak, in terms of returning to the art and cultural activities that they have been engaging in over the last number of years. And also, not a big surprise, young culture goers are much more likely to report coming back to kind of the full diversity of art and culture experiences compared to middle-aged and older culture goers. Motivators, something interesting and fun. And being really at the top and actually increasing compared to May, really being the top driver. Maybe this speaks to, the frame of mind that some culture goers are in. The other thing that's interesting is that this particular question is open-ended, which means that the culture goers can say whatever they want when they say what their motivators are. So, you can see by a significant margin of more than 4 to 1, it's basically program related in terms of an art or culture experience that they believe is interesting or fun, and 4 times more important than the prices. Masks, you can see, has had a significant decline from 17% in May to 7%. But the key takeaway here is that key thing to get people out of the couch, out of the home, out into arts and culture activities has to do with programming and wanting something fun. And one of the other things I'd like to point out, I remember I was asking one of the previous calls with the panelists when we were chit-chatting about the survey. They're asking, hey Nick, are young people, do they want more fun than older people? And here's the good news. Doesn't matter whether you're young or old, male or female, it all comes down to doing something interesting and fun at this particular point in time. So it probably speaks to the types of programming that culture goers are searching out at this particular point in time. The other thing that we kind of unpacked had to do with donations. And, you can see here the average amount of donations in 2021 and 2022. But the key takeaway here is that people are much more likely to say that they intend to spend more than the same. You can see 28% compared to 10% in 2022. So some positive movement on that front. The one thing that we did unpack in this particular wave had to do with ticket purchasing preferences. And we asked people about their ticket purchasing preferences in the pre-pandemic environment and currently. And you can see here that before the pandemic, up to 37% of culture goers said they were purchasing tickets up to 6 months in advance. Still a big number now, but it's down to 28%. Not a lot of difference on a lot of the other ones, but it looks like for those folks that are real advanced planners, that they've kind of scaled back a little bit. So with that, those are the numbers, and I will be happy to join the chat to answer any questions about the stats or the questions. And also, if you have any other ideas for Business in the Arts and the NAC to add to the project in the future, please post them there, because we'll all be reading all of the posts. We'll be very interested in the posts for new ideas for the project. So, Kondwani, back to you and the panel.
Thanks so much, Nick. I really appreciate it. I love that fun is coming out in the research. Just as Nick mentioned earlier, if anybody has any technical questions about the data, about the methodology, I think Nick is going to be hanging out, as he said, and is going to be happy to answer any of those questions in the Q&A box as well during our discussion. Please feel free to go ahead and put your questions there. And now, without further ado, I'd like to get to the panelists who've joined us, and I'll ask Nick to stay on as well, of course. But first, it's Christine Sadler, who is the founding principal of Sadler Inc. Art Advisory, an independent firm specializing in the care, management, logistics, and project management of fine art collections. Until very recently, she was Director of Development at the McMichael Canadian Art Collection, and previously, she was CEO of the National Gallery of Canada Foundation, where she led fundraising efforts in support of programs, exhibitions, and community initiatives, including Canada's representation at the Venice Biennial. She was head of exhibitions at the National Gallery for 8 years, working to strengthen Canadian artists on the world stage and managed the national and international traveling exhibitions program. She held senior positions at the Jewish Museum in New York, the National Portrait Gallery, London, and the Design Museum, London, and was board of directors for the Toronto Biennial of Art. She has a BA and an MA in art history and an MBA. Wow, wow, wow. Christine, welcome. Second and last on the panel here, but certainly not least, we are joined by Jason Demers. Growing up in a small northern Alberta francophone town of Jean Côté, Jason strived for a career that would make a difference. To his fortune, he discovered his career choice when he was hired to do door-to-door fundraising for the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra. The fire was lit, and he has stayed true to his passion, serving over 25 years in the nonprofit sector. Today, he's the Director of Development at the Theatre Calgary, a role he has enjoyed since January of 2022. Welcome to you both. Thank you, Nick, again, and let's jump in. I think what I want to start off with, selfishly speaking, is something that that Nick mentioned about people's time to purchase tickets, and so I call that life in the last minute. Not life in the fast lane, but life in the last minute. So maybe I'll start with you, Jason. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about purchasing trends at Theatre Calgary. Are audiences favoring subscriptions or single ticket purchases? And has that changed throughout the pandemic? Again, I also want to get your insight in terms of the length of time that people are taking to purchase tickets, and I'll throw to you.
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share in terms of our own experience here at Theatre Calgary. And to your question, yes, we've certainly seen people purchasing tickets at the last minute. Pre-pandemic, we've seen our subscriptions going down slightly. So we ended the year in 18-19 with just over 9,000 subscriptions. And last year, coming out of the pandemic, we had just over 2,500. And this year we have about 3,500. So when you do the math, it's about 40% of our historic average. So we knew our subscriptions were going down, but we didn't know it would go down by that much coming out of the pandemic itself. So we can certainly see that buyers are changing the way that they purchase their tickets. And even in comments from people that are calling in, they're saying, yeah, we're just buying the week of or a month out, depending on the show. This year we did a create your own subscription. So you can sign up for 3 or 4 shows just to try to capture those crowds that didn't want to subscribe for the whole season, but wanted to attend more than one show. So to encourage them to sign up for more than one show, we gave them a greater discount. But certainly we have seen our subscriptions go down significantly coming out of the pandemic. And we're pretty sure that we won't see it hit those pre-pandemic numbers. It's just a question of how high will it get to? Like, will we hit 5,000 or 6,000? That is a question still to be determined.
Yeah, I really appreciate that insight, Jason. And I have to say, very similar stories happening at the National Arts Center. We're wondering whether or not we'll return, if you will, to those pre-pandemic levels. Kind of muscling our way through with each day and each moment when it pertains to subscriptions, but just purchasing habits as in general. Christina, I would be remiss to not obviously hear from you in terms of your world, which I think lands a little bit more in memberships and donations. But can you share your experience with everybody listening about how purchasing trends have evolved within the visual arts sector, and just how that has happened over the past few years as well?
Right. Well, yes, you're quite right. I mean, it is a different model in the sense that most museums and art museums do have a membership base and a kind of donor circle, or different types of donor circles. And of course, during the pandemic, we shifted completely, like everybody else, to having to book in advance and using time ticketing. And what I would say is, we found that our members, not so much walk-in visitors, but certainly members and donors have been very loyal. In other words, when their membership was due to expire, we did not find overall a trend of people saying, no, I'm going to wait, I'm going to wait until the pandemic is over, or no, I don't want to be a member anymore. One of the things that we did find, though, and when I speak to other colleagues in the art museum world, is that it is difficult to get new donors and new members as well. In other words, people have been very loyal to the existing, especially arts donors, very loyal to the institution if they have a history of supporting it. But trying to get new people has just been a real challenge, for the obvious reasons of, partially having to book in advance can be a little bit of a barrier, and obviously because of the closures as well. So I think the art museum, trends also are that crowds and visitors and members are coming back, but they are definitely not at pre-pandemic levels.
Yeah, I appreciate the insight there. And I think when we had a couple conversations prior to this one, and it was one of those where there was some level of comfort that we were living the same similar experiences, that we're living the same lanes. I see you smiling both. But in effect, it's sort of like, well, we're comfortable but uncomfortable being in the same boat in this one, but that is the reality that we're faced with. I want to come back to both of you on, maybe Jason, you on the CYO, and the choose your own rather, and the new Christine, but I'll come back to that in a second, because I want that to be maybe the next set of questions. Before I go there, I wanted to also point out, one of the things that piqued my interest was the survey showed that donation intentions have been relatively consistent, climbing, I think, to about 146, if I remember correctly from the slides that Nick presented. Inflation is continuing to rise. Canadians do not have as much disposable income that to attend the arts and cultural events. How are your organizations in particular, trying to confront this change, this reality? Is it something that's been on your purview? Maybe I'll start with you, Christine, since you were just talking. So your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that museums, certainly membership and visitation obviously is driven by still quite to a large extent what a temporary exhibition program is on. And what I would say in terms of inflation is most museums are conscious of it. I have seen a trend, and certainly the places that I've worked, I've seen programs like a lot of free admission programs, thanks to donors, either on a particular day or for a particular program. Certainly I can speak to, my time at the McMichael, we had a really interesting period where we offered free Tuesdays that increased attendance, bookstore sales, etc. But we found that we didn't necessarily get the kind of demographics that we were also looking for, which was more younger people, younger families. So we shifted that to free family Sundays, which really hit parents with young children, lots of programming going on as well. And we found that to be really successful. And I've seen it at other institutions as well.
I love that. I love that. And, that ingenuity to be able to I know this is becoming a 4-letter word, but pivot to those spaces, makes a lot of sense. And I know there's a couple of questions coming in the chat. Please, people, feel free and continue to ask questions about that cohort, the younger demographics. Jason, I want to throw to you though, before we move on to another question, your perspective in terms of inflation and what you're seeing out west.
Yeah, the inflation one is certainly interesting in the sense that it's not one that we're passing on to the consumer in the sense that we're raising ticket prices, because we're not in that position where we can. And so it's contracting the organization really heavily in the sense that we have to mitigate expenses because we're not getting increased revenue. And also with the ticket sales not being at our budgeted targets, it puts further restraints on the organization in terms of where do we cut, how do we cut, especially when the majority of our expenses are on the wages side. I mean, it'd be easy to say, okay, we'll cut down expenses on set design, yet there's only so much you can cut on the set design. And then on the wage side, we haven't increased wages, and it's something that the unions haven't done yet, but you can certainly see that coming down the road. And so inflation is there in the background, and it's impacting us more from the budgetary side of things. And it could also be a reason why fewer people are purchasing tickets and coming to shows. In terms of that disposable income that they have, there's a lot less of that going around. And so that could be a reason why people are not coming back to theater.
Yeah, really good point, and the perfect segue, Jason. You're reading my notes here onto we're in sync here for sure. In terms of that last point that you hit on about people coming back, the arts response tracking survey did show that there have been consistently been about I think it was 1 in 20, or sorry, 1 in 5. So about 25% of the culture goers are remaining unsure of when they will come back to the arts. I guess the question is for you, are you both experiencing that in your ecosystems, in your world? And then, what steps are you looking at in order to take to kind of entice people back? And, again, I'll start with you, Jason, and then come to you, Christine.
Yeah, it's certainly something that we're seeing across the country. Even PACT just released their stats with regards to theaters and ticket sales, and even looking at our own ticket sales of our show that just closed, our slot 1 show that just finished in September, it sold 61% of historical average. And that's significant, right? And we did budget fewer ticket sales, but it's certainly still not at where we budgeted, because it's very hard to forecast in terms of how many people are going to come back to theater. We haven't increased ticket sales. And one thing that we're seeing, and that the data supports, if you look at, dig deeper into the data that Nick and his group did, 70% of people under the age of 35 are coming back. However, those that are 35 and above, only 50% of them have come back. And that is our main demographic in terms of theater. And we're certainly seeing that on our side, that our main demographic isn't coming back, and we're looking at how do we engage that younger audience. And it's proving extremely difficult, because how do we get in front of them? Like, I mean, that's $1 million question of what kind of marketing will work, because the big question that we have at Theatre Calgary is, okay, we know there's an issue in terms of people coming to theater. and arts in general. So how do we engage them to come back and feel and see what they're missing? Because it's one thing to experience things from your couch, but it's another one to experience it within a theater amongst 400 to 500 people. And we know that it's not necessarily COVID now that is preventing people from coming back. So how do we get them back and see what they're missing? So then the question becomes, do we throw more money at marketing? We don't have the answer. And so we're trying a number of different things, including more marketing, to try to bring that younger demographic as well as our people that used to attend theater back. We've done phone calls, we've done lots of email campaigns, and it's like, how do we get them back? And so certainly would welcome other thoughts, but we're picking at everything to try to get them back, and it's still not quite working. And so it could be a case of we just need to be patient. But then the question is, how long can we wait financially for all of our organizations for these crowds to come back? And so it's certainly being felt across the board. And you touched on it as well, in the sense that, it's a blessing and a curse that we're not the only ones.
Yeah.
Right.
100%. Christine, I saw you nodding a lot when Jason was talking, and this is something that we've hit on in a couple of conversations earlier. Can you share your experience as well to that respect in terms of getting people back?
Yes, Jason and I are completely aligned in terms of getting people back. And something I didn't say earlier about our membership is, I think one of the things that I found, and my sort of fellow peers and colleagues found, is that while a membership and donor base were extremely loyal during the pandemic, and in my mind, that meant they're focusing less on those sort of transactional benefits and focusing more on, the actual mission of the organization. Now that we can come together again, what I'm finding, I'm asking the same questions as Jason, in the sense that, yes, it's a question of more marketing, but what I'm actually finding, and this may be because of the feasibility of digital learning as well, is that in order to get people out of their homes, we are seeing a lot of fundraising departments turn into event organization departments, where not only it's not good enough just to put this exhibition on or this display on, but it's got to be accompanied by an event or a dinner, something that is going to gather people and actually get the conversation going, which is a wonderful thing to do. But everybody agrees that that is a really heavy lift for tiny departments. So it's tricky to kind of balance that, mission-driven, sort of goal with the fact that events take a lot of work and a lot of resources. And maybe that's the way it is now. Maybe people do need an extra special push to get out. And that's probably the way that we really target new donors and new members as well. I just think everybody that I speak to says that despite the feasibility of digital learning, and that we all loved when we were scrambling to get all of our digital material together, that we had participants from all over the world, it does not replace trying to get people to cross the threshold into our actual organizations physically. So it's a real conundrum.
Oh, you're starting me on a track, Christine, that I was told not to go down. Don't entice me to go there. And maybe one of these conversations in the future, one of these panels will talk about the role of digital and how it can be an amplifier, or and how do we make it an amplifier and crack that nut, because I think that's another nut that needs to be cracked. Jason, you mentioned something. I love the words that you used. You said, feel what you're missing. And then I think you went back to see what you're missing, but I love the idea of feel what you're missing. So Christine, when you talk about these events, so far, have you seen some sort of traction in terms of building building an experience? And I say that as a leading question, partially because, you know, at the NAC, National Arts Center, we're looking at that very closely about building these connected experiences throughout the whole a journey on all these different touch points. It's complex. It's not that complex, but it is involved, as you say. However, there's that part about it where it's you know, you're turning it into an event. Christine, Jason, have you had any experience with that specifically, and how has it been?
I think the key to holding engagement events for your members and for your donors, this is a really great way to connect, especially after the pandemic. The trick is always to leverage it post-event. And for me, and I think for a lot of my peers, that's the hardest thing to do. Is you've had the event, people had a great time. Now what? So what? Now what do you do?
Yeah.
So that's the question.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the one of those. It is one of those things where it's like the, you know, I think in this industry, the idea of like the curtain literally closing and it's like the show's over, but it's like, no, now there's quote unquote the after party. Jason, have you experienced with these setting up these types of experiences or events? And if so, maybe you can share.
Yeah, a lot of our stuff has been focused on those that are already coming, in the sense that when we look at our artistic champions here at Theatre Calgary, which is $1,000 and up, we've invited them to a number of events. We're seeing that attendance at these events is less than what it's been at the past, but those that are attending really appreciate the fact because they miss that socializing. Our opening nights as well, which I see one of our board members is mentioning, is another way that we're connecting. But once again, it's those that are already coming to theater. And we've had some of our previous members coming back this year in particular, because they feel more comfortable. However, it's not quite to the pre-pandemic levels. And I've struggled, Christine, honestly, in terms of whether or not to put on a formal special event, because to your point, it takes a lot of time and effort to acquire those gifts when that same time and effort could go into acquiring major gifts. And so I always struggle with that one. But it may be, you know, time to do a shift in the sense that if that's what it's going to take to bring people back, then it's worth the effort for, you know, one or two of those, because right now a lot of what we're doing is focused on the choir. We're preaching to the choir, and it's like, how do we get and connect with those that are the 25% that aren't sure when they're going to come back?
I love it. Thank you for that insight, Jason. You know, all of this sort of blends into one of my last questions that I want to rest with for a little bit, because I think it's really interesting. And it's this concept of I'm going to drop a 4-letter word here, hope. I think what Nick showed us before has ambers of that, is that there is hope out there. And it's something that is a message that's resonated with me, that our CEO at the National Arts Center has mentioned quite a few times. And I've latched onto that word. I've latched onto it because also it gives us an opportunity from an innovative perspective to try out these events, to try out different things that maybe can work and need maybe refining. So in the spirit of that, I wanna Jason, if you can share, I hope I'm getting this right, Calgary's Choice, what you did with Calgary's Choice, and maybe we can unpack that a little bit through just a little bit of this discussion before we wrap.
Yeah, thanks. So Calgary's Choice was a marketing initiative that we conducted in February of 2021 in order to try to engage all of Calgary into coming back to theater. And so what we pitched to the whole entire city was Calgary's Choice, which was, we gave them a list of 6 plays, and we asked them, choose what will be the last play of the upcoming 22-23 season. And we had a great response from the overall city in terms of picking and they picked a solid winner, which was Escape to Margaritaville. And to Nick's research, it's fun, it's interesting, right? We had a number of other choices that were on there. And so we told Calgary, what their choice was, and we launched our season in March. And theater is a funny little beast in the sense that there's a lot of pre-planning that has to take place in order to secure specific plays at a specific time. And so the lead time for theater is a lot longer than it is for other arts organizations. And so it was a great response. Did we pick up additional ticket buyers? I think we did, but we certainly need to do a lot more work on that. It wasn't the magic pill that we were hoping that it would be, but it certainly went a long ways in engaging the whole entire city and making them aware of Theatre Calgary and giving them the chance to choose one of the plays, which normally does not happen in our industry. It's usually something that we pick in isolation and hope that it's something that will resonate well with the group itself.
I appreciate that example. And Christine, I'm going to come to you in a second with a very similar question, if whether or not you've done anything similar to that. But I'll rest with you for one more second, Jason. Double click on that is, would you do it again? And if you would, what modifications would you consider making to that? I think it's a fascinating idea that I'm very intrigued about, and maybe we'll take it offline, but maybe the simple question is, would you do it again?
I pause and I hesitate. And here's the reason why. I do not envy any artistic director in this current area, whether they're theater, museums. Any artistic director has a very tough job of picking and choosing what people are going to come and see. And oftentimes it happens well in advance of it being launched, because it has to be a balance. But here's the issue. The issue is people want something fun and interesting. And it becomes problematic for artistic directors because of the fact that, okay, fun and interesting is Mary Poppins, Billy Elliot, the Turner Classics, essentially. Do they want to see, let's say, Little Red Warrior and his lawyer, something that's a bit, off the cuff and something that's more artistic? And so it's like, where's that balance to make sure that you're bringing people into theater, but still challenging them at the same time? And so that's why I say the biggest challenge is for the artistic directors to have a product that is interesting for people to come back to, especially coming out of the pandemic, but still making it challenging so that it is art. It's not just, making them laugh just because we want to make them laugh, right? So that's the biggest challenge. So going back to your question of would we do Calgary's Choice again? It's tough because of the fact that there's so many things that come into balancing a season. And I think we would do it again, but slightly do it differently so that we carry on the engagement and the buy-in much longer, because there was a bit of a lag time between when we launched our season, which was March, and when it went on sale, which was at the beginning of May because of logistical issues. So it's more a technicality than anything else. So
yeah, and I love that. Thank you for the profound answer. I think you're right. It is complicated. There's a lot of things that programming departments and leaders have to wrestle with. I see in the chat here, I think Little Red Warrior is getting some votes right here. So maybe if you can use that as a sample for the audience. Christine, I wanted to come to you as well on this because you were the one that sort of inspired it when you talked about events. This idea of maybe doing it differently. I don't know if you've had specific instances of doing it differently, or maybe if there's something you wanted to lend to this Calgary's Choice-esque concept.
I think all art museums, all chief curators, all executive directors in art museums have constantly grappled with the program balance of Monet, or what you want to call a blockbuster, versus Agnes Martin or something, conceptual art, things like that. So while I haven't heard of an art museum necessarily giving a sort of visitor's choice, and that's probably also to do just with the logistical complexity of kind of organizing these things 5 years in advance. On the note of hope, what I would say is when you move up to the major gift level, the leadership gift level, and the really kind of big mega gifts, philanthropy at those levels is increasing. And museums are expanding as well. We know the Glenbow Museum has received, I think just this week or last week, another major gift. Things are running really, really smoothly in Vancouver in terms of their capital project. So I would say there is hope there. And even though it's a slight difference, Nick's survey does say that donations are increasing. And I think you see that as you kind of move up the gift level. So that gives me hope.
I love that. I'm going to bottle that up and keep it and take it everywhere I go, Christine. I think that's a really, really good point. I wanted to maybe go a little bit off script here and invite Nick to come back. If you're waiting in the wings, I'd love to have you in on this last question that I wanted to have. And the reason is, when we talked about the research that you were doing, there was this, you brought up this concept of time and how it is a reflection of a moment in time. I would love for you to maybe just expand on that a little bit. And then you had this term, my notes, transitional programming, which I think speaks a little bit to what we're hinting at here. And I don't want to get into a conversation on programming necessarily, but you had this concept of time. So Nick, if you could share with the group, and then I'd love Christine and Jason's thoughts on it before we go to Q&A.
And I'd like to say that when I say transitional programming, I mean it in the most positive sense, not to diminish what we're going to talk about. What's interesting is that, in a lot of the research that we've done on the role of arts and culture during the pandemic is that people associate that as part of the healing process, right? It's associated with better mental health, just being in a better place. And I guess what I want to put on the table, looking at some of the data, and it was kind of like when they had the open-ended question, because we do a lot of work in the space, I was waiting for the bring back the greatest hits, right? Which is what a lot of organizations have, like, these are our greatest hits. And it's like, dust off the greatest hits and let's get back and bring back our patrons. That didn't come up, which was kind of, and to my point, that maybe we're at a moment in time where the type of programming that people are proactively seeking out has to do with programming that is interesting, programming that is fun, programming that is validating, programming that is social, programming that just makes you feel good. As part of that, let's put that pandemic behind us and let's start the process of wellness and how participating in art and cultural activities is part of our wellness on a go-forward basis. And we don't know, we can't look into the future, but my guess is that I say that we're perhaps in a transitional moment where that's what people want and that's what people need in that post-pandemic period, but that they'll still want the greatest hits eventually. It's kind of like, first thing back, I want to feel good and I want to have some fun. And then I want to get back into all those things that I loved. And I want to put that on the table as something to think about as a moment in time, the programming that's needed at a moment in time that patrons are potentially increasingly looking at.
Thank you so much for that insight, Nick. And I like the way you frame that. It's not necessarily dusting off the greatest hits, but definitely responding to that. Jason, I'm going to give you the last word on this one because you brought out that feel what you're missing, because I really like that. I'm gonna have to pay you a little ransom, a sum for that afterwards. But Christine, your reaction to what Nick just said in terms of this moment in time and where you're feeling, I mean, you kind of got me inspired with that call for hope as well. What's your reaction to that, where we are in this moment in time?
Well, Nick said something interesting as a sort of, the arts now are being called upon as a go forward, response to stress relief and mental health. I mean, I think for those of us that are working in the field, art and culture has always been a source of, rejuvenation and truth telling. And, for us artists are really at the sort of beacon of truth, right? But I do see more and more that there are kind of specialized programs. Montreal was a big leader in terms of, doctors' prescriptions and sort of programs around mental health and whatnot. And my feeling is, I think that is all great. Whatever your reason to be coming to performing arts, the performing arts sector or the art museum sector, that's wonderful. The only thing I would say is, let's all of us not forget that actually art for art's sake also has a lot of value. And that is essentially what we are all about at the core of our missions.
Remarkable. Thank you so much, Christine, for those sage words. It provides for me, what in my head anyways, a thread to nice segue to you, Jason. I said off the top that you've spent 25 years in the nonprofit sector. You kind of had a call for this, and it drew you in for art's sake, as Christine is mentioning, for the last word in this Q&A. So before we go to the Q&A, rather, your thoughts on that question of time, that question of hellness, and where you are and your organization is. Thank you, Nick. But
yeah, so one of the interesting things that we had a great conversation with one of our prospective sponsors, and I'll do a shout out to Mayfair Diagnostics. They actually see the value of arts in terms of from the wellness piece. And they actually came on as a wellness sponsor this year to talk specifically about art and how it impacts your wellness. And so we're going to have a couple of wellness campaigns that they're sponsoring to that point. It's certainly extremely valuable and something to reinforce, especially in this day and age. Going back in terms of the actual audience itself, I think COVID has exposed in terms of, for some of the arts groups, that our reliance too much on a specific demographic. And I'll use Theatre Calgary as a specific example. We knew our demographic was an older demographic. We've been trying to change that cultural perception of theater away from that. However, we haven't done it soon enough. And as a result, the younger demographic that are going back to arts things are not coming back to theater because they still have this view of theater as, one person told our artistic director, grandma's theater. And so it's something that's going to take time to change, and it's through programming as well as marketing. And so the key thing for us is making sure that we can get through this transition, as Nick likes to call it, to appealing to that younger demographic so that we can have a broader audience. And it's something that we definitely need to spend the time and attention on to be able to do that. What that looks like, I think it's going to take a lot of soul searching as well as reaching out to that demographic to see how do we change brand as well as programming to encourage that demographic, because I don't think as an industry we'll be able to survive unless we find an effective way of bringing that younger demographic into theater itself, because we can't rely on just our traditional demographics anymore. So it's both a hope as well as a cautionary tale, and one that we're currently living and that we're trying to change as we go along. So
Wow. I'm happy I threw to you in the last word there. Thank you so much for that, Jason. That's, really encouraging, as you say, the hope and the cautionary tale at the same time. And it's something that, again, for anybody who's listening, the same things that the National Arts Center we're living through, we're experiencing, realizing that we have to have a more of a proactive approach to people who don't know us yet or who see us as a grandma's theater, because we certainly aren't. So it is definitely, we're on common ground there, and I think hopefully a common hopeful ground as well. I will want to brag for a little bit for Aubrey, because I think I'm right on time to go to the Q&A. So we'll go to the Q&A, and some of these Some of these questions I think we've been on the fringe of, but I'll just kind of read them to be precise, if you will. So I think the top rated question for I think both of you certainly is this, is that patron confidence has definitely taken a hit through the pandemic, lockdowns and restrictions. We just mentioned that, Jason, for sure. Now the question is, I suppose, is do we accept a permanent retreat from advanced package purchases as inevitable? Or does the panel have any thoughts on slowly, carefully, confidently rebuilding, with a caveat there that the former, which I suppose is the inevitability of that, is pretty darn scary from a financial modeling perspective. Thank you for that question, and I see a lot of thumbs up on that one as well.
Yeah, I'll go ahead on that one. We know for a fact that the traditional subscription model is pretty well dead. It's something that we're maintaining just for those that come back every year with regards to save your seats. They want to sit in the same seats for every single show for the whole entire season. We're doing that, but we're focusing more on script your own season, which is why we went that route this particular year. And we had a great uptake on that. And it's certainly the way that we're going to be going in the future, is providing a lot more flexibility with regards to the purchasing. And it puts a lot of emphasis on what we put as our product in terms of the upcoming plays to make sure it's one that they want to attend, but once again, balancing that out with not just the Turner Classics, but also something like Little Red Warrior and His Lawyer, which is we need to do. It's something that people should experience, and we see value in that, as well as developing new plays. And that's something that we don't want to lose sight of. And we need to be stewards of that. And so it's finding that balance. And I certainly do not envy the artistic directors in that role, because it's a tough job.
Really appreciate that input, but I think you've nailed it. Christine, your world is different. It's not subscriptions, and I'm not sure the question wasn't necessarily about prescriptions per se, but I'll ask you for your input on that same question vis-a-vis, I guess, memberships in your instance.
Well, first, I just wanted to say, repeat what Jason said, is it takes time to build new audiences for programming also that is perhaps not seen as, as popular as others. And this is just not something that you build in a season. And that's similar in the visual arts sector as well. It's not going to happen in one fiscal year. I mean, that kind of thing, we've got to look at sort of three to 4 year stretches, I think, to be able to build those audiences. And you're right, Jason, it takes investment in marketing, and it takes innovation as well, when we're seeing all of these competing forces, like, these immersive Monet things and light shows, and then, streaming, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I just want to validate, and repeat what you said, is takes a long time. It's a long game. And then what I would say with membership, it is different. And I would say, the visual arts sector, and certainly the institutions that I've worked with, count on membership. So it's not so much, oh, we need you to book in advance for this particular exhibition sometimes. And I think that's where we do differ, is that I don't think, in my mind, membership is declining, but there are demographics that we still are not hitting. And how do we grow that pool at the membership level? That's what we've been talking about.
Oh, thank you so much. This is not about the National Arts Center, but I will say, I'm jumping off of what both of you have said, and I think what I took a couple of notes here in terms of the intentionality with which we rebrand, if you will, Grandma's Theater, to say, hey, this is your theater, this is your space, whether it be from a theater perspective or from a donor perspective. I think that is something that takes time, but I think if it's done with intention, that's what gives me some real excitement in the possibilities of what can be out there. I'll go to the Q&A as we have a little bit more time here. Does anyone on the panel or among the viewers have any information, I believe, about new audience members really in the 24 to 39 age bracket coming into live performance venues for the first time or returning? So that is a little bit more pointed towards those millennials and a little bit outside of that. Jason, Christine, I kind of leave it open to you if you've had any experience with that. I can certainly speak to the National Arts Center as well.
Age is not something that we track in terms of the ticket purchasing. So it's something that we observe within the audience itself. And so it's more visual than anything else. We saw, it was interesting with $1 Million Quartet, the diversity in the crowd, which we were like super pleased about, because it's like, we were kind of concerned. It's like, well, who wants to listen to Johnny Cash, Elvis, you know, those kind of artists back in the 60s. And it's like, and we were quite pleased to see not just age-wise, but also culturally, the diversity in the crowd itself. And so it was certainly rewarding, and also something that promising in terms of trying to get to those crowds. But it's more on the longer basis is, how do we keep those crowds engaged, right? And do we target specific programming just for those particular demographics, knowing that our long-term patrons will come because they just love coming to Theatre Calgary, regardless of the programming itself. And so there's more risk at play with regards to trying to appeal to the younger audiences. And so do you build your season based on that? So that's a longer term question for us, but we are certainly seeing some pickup, but you know, we probably need to track the age to definitive to say for sure whether or not we're making inroads on that particular demographic.
Appreciate that. Christine, anything in particular there that would be jumping out at you in your world?
Certainly, I would say, I would deign to say that most art museums, their membership probably skews to the older kind of 55 and up age bracket, probably skews more female than male as well, and probably does not show enough diversity, and more we would all like more diversity in those figures. So I don't know, it's just a challenge. I mean, it's also where people's life stages are. When I was at the McMichael, we tried to focus on young families, because that's a really challenging time for parents, and nobody has any time whatsoever at that time. And, you know, certainly the AGO has experienced great success in terms of their membership program for, and they've seen that. So that also kind of speaks to their location and where they are. I'm not saying it's a model that can be replicated exactly, but it's just something I'd love to, you know, talk to fellow peers about trying to solve, because I think it's at once a problem that we all experience, but the solution all has to be custom tailored to every individual's organization and location.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. It's this idea of, you know, it's not really one size fits all in terms of solutioning, and even the nuances with some of the challenges that we have. 100%. I think, you know, for people watching and myself, I'm taking notes, tons of notes on both discussions we've had, or in terms of like the experiences that you've had. I'll probably have some double clicks with both of you. And I welcome, obviously, people to have double clicks, you know, of their own and more conversations. But it's this idea of like, hey, maybe that's something that can apply in my world, that can be applied to my audience, my prospective diverse audience. And how do I make sure that that engagement stays up? Because Jason, to your point, you know, it's one thing to walk into a hall and see that diversity of ages and you know, genders and different ethnicities, and that's amazing, but you want to make sure they come back again and again and again. So, it's to be continued, I suppose. I'm looking at the time here, but I want to just point out a couple more questions here. There's one question here that's specific to you, Christine. You said that there were existing members have been supportive and have continued to renew their memberships. So I guess it's a two-part question. Number one, do you have an idea of the age cohort of the members who have remained as members? And maybe the second part to that, or not maybe, the second part to that is, did those members who renewed their membership, did they visit regularly this year, or have they been hesitant to come back? So I can reread the second part of that, sorry. But we're sticking on age again, right? It's one of
That's
those.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. No doubt about it. The statistics do not lie. It's 55 and up. We want to I know the McMichael and my colleagues there now still want to diversify that, but largely it skews the older. And then in terms of members returning, actually, I would say, and from the events and activities at other institutions that I've gone to, there has been enthusiasm in coming back as well. I mean, I think all of us will remember that the sort of first opportunities when we all reopened after the pandemic, we were all enforcing the wearing of masks as well. And that's not easy when you're running an event, but actually we found that our donors didn't care. They wanted to get out. So given that those restrictions also have lifted, I think that's just increased the number of people that want to come out. So I think people are just having a little bit of FOMO, right? In terms of this like desperate demand to see other people. It's just that the arts have a lot of competition right now in terms of entertaining how people spend their free time.
Yeah, 100%. That FOMO, the FOMO is real, but I think we've got an exciting story to tell. I don't know why. Well, I know why, but feel what you're missing. I'm telling you, Jason, there's a check coming your way somewhere. Listen, we're really close to time on this, and I'm kind of torn between two questions, but I will go with the one that has been voted the highest. So hopefully I'm doing this correctly. Voted the highest right now is again sticking with the younger cohort. Or actually, maybe I'll do an audible here, and I apologize to everybody because we have talked about the youth market a little bit. So I'll take the second most popular question. Apologies again to all who voted. In my experience, oops, sorry, that's not the question I wanted. There was a question about are you also, sorry, here it is. Are you also having conversations with artistic staff about providing a product that appeals to this younger demographic, not just with marketing? So, it's still in the realm of the youth, but it's asking, are you going internally and speaking to your teams about that instead of just the people who are maybe doing the branding and positioning? Christine, maybe I'll start with you and then I'll end with Jason.
Yeah, I think the answer is you have to talk directly to your customers and your would-be customers. And there's no question that contemporary art is something that does resonate with a younger audience. And I think just given that certainly the McMichael, we've had a real emphasis on highlighting diverse and a lot of younger emerging female artists as well. That has also brought to the fore kind of an interest and a desire for younger people to kind of re-engage with art. But again, our younger visitors are not joining as members. It's kind of the similar situation with Jason and subscribers. They are coming and I think they're having a good time, but maybe the notion of, locking them in is something that may not be for everybody. So it's interesting. And it's price too. I'll say it's price driven as well, no doubt.
Yeah, appreciate that. Jason, maybe I can put you on the spot for the last word.
Yeah, definitely. And before I forget, I'd like to mention also that we started an initiative last year, 40 under 40, because we recognize the fact that the younger crowds don't have as much available money, to your point, Christine, as well. Like it's just a different stage of life and everything in terms of, even as a student, they certainly can't afford as much. And so we implemented that. And I think it's just a matter of getting that marketing out a bit more so that they can see it. And so we're doing a bit more on that. So we're seeing more uptake this year on that particular initiative. In terms of having conversations with the artistic team, they hear it, they see it, they talk it every single day. They're very well aware of where we are financially in terms of ticket sales. And so we're currently discussing what our 23-24 season is going to look like. And we have to have these conversations now because a lot of things have to be booked well in advance. And so you kind of take your crystal ball, which is very cloudy, and kind of anticipate, okay, if we do this, this, and this, and this, will it appeal to a broader demographic? And making sure that it's a balanced season as well. And also respecting the fact that as Theatre Calgary, there's new plays in development that we want to bring to the forefront. And so how do we bring those in, as well as some of the Turner classics and things that we know or think will sell for sure? And so to my point, the artistic director has a very tough job because they have to slot everything in, and it's like a puzzle. It's like every piece has to fit perfectly, because you can't just slot something in mid-season and expect it to work with everything else. But yeah, the artistic team is fully aware, and even on the inflation side of things, making sure that we're keeping costs in check as well, so we're not going to have a huge production set. And one of the decisions that we made because of COVID was, traditionally in the December time slot, we have a Christmas Carol. We've done this many, 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 many years. And because of COVID, we didn't feel that we could take that risk with a cast of 27 people, not knowing where we would be with COVID in December 2022. So we made the decision to go with Little Women. Now, is that going to hurt us? It might, it may not, but once again, we don't know where COVID's going to be in December. And so going with the cast of 9 versus a cast of 27, very, very tough decision as an organization that we have to make. And I'm sure many of those on this call are also thinking of those decisions of, we're not out of the pandemic yet. And so how do we make those choices that will appeal to the broader crowd? So I don't think we have all the answers, but it's something that we're working towards.
Really appreciate that from both of you, and definitely think that there's a lot of answers in there. I don't think this is about a magic bullets or one singular answer. It's a combination of them, and I thank you both, and as well as Nick, for that. Aubrey, over to you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for another fascinating discussion. I love the hope that everyone expressed. Let's keep that going. I also was particularly struck by the level of interest in engaging younger audiences. There definitely needs to be innovative approaches to both marketing and programming for connecting with younger audiences and diverse audiences. But I also want to pick up on both Jason and Christine's comments that we need patience, because engaging the next generation is a long game. Not only should we be thinking about that 18 to 40 demographic, but also the under 18 group, because if we work to cultivate an interest in art now among children and teens, it'll mean that once they are grown up and ready to make their own consumer decisions, they will be more inclined to choose the arts. So that probably means having to re-engage schools and teachers on arts education programs, especially since many of those were shut down for so long during the pandemic. So a big thank you to Nick Nanos of Nanos Research for your continued partnership and expertise on the Arts Response Tracking Survey. And many thanks to our superb panelists, Christine Sadler and Jason Demers, for contributing your insightful responses and answering everybody's questions. And a big thank you to Kondwani for moderating today's session. You did a fantastic job of keeping to time. And the National Arts Center for your continuing involvement and support of this project. Thank you to David Bennett, as well as Christine Armstrong and Irfan Raji as supporters of this project. And finally, thank you to Power Corporation of Canada as our presenting partner of the Business and Arts Speaker Series. Finally, when this webinar ends, a short survey will launch aimed at gathering your thoughts on the Arts Response Tracking Survey. Thank you in advance for taking a couple minutes to share your feedback, which will help us to continue to assist the sector's recovery efforts and provide targeted tools and resources. So please also visit the Business and Arts website or follow us on social media for future announcements. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.